Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? Among the news items we have for you this week is an update about just how effective vaccines are with the Omicron variant, both after 2 doses and when receiving a booster. These two distinct differences are very important. Another vaccine, but this time, rather than looking at the COVID-19 virus, it's an mRNA vaccine for influenza. There's also other vaccines which may help with aging this week. The timestamps for these and other news items can be found in the description box below. Let's start with Pfizer as a vaccine for the CCP virus and just how effective it is with the Omicron variant. Remembering, the Omicron variant is the most recent stable mutation which has found relatively widespread exposure across the globe. It's expected to well and truly overtake the present Delta wave. When we're looking at this, the big concern will be, is the current vaccine regime going to be effective at providing immunity to this most recent mutation? Has the mutation generated enough changes that the immune system, once trained with the first and then second dose of most vaccines, enough that it can then slip by without being noticed and dealt with? Information from South Africa's largest insurer and their Medical Research Council have said that there was likely to be a significant drop. They say 92% versus the previous Delta variant. Those are the sorts of numbers that sound alarming on the surface, and frankly they are, if that's all there was to it. It's more complicated than just there's a 92% reduction. Rather, it's assumed that 78,000 of the 211,000 lab test results that were examined between the 15th of November and December 7th were of the Omicron variant, but this change and the distinct group that they are was not confirmed. Assumptions. They'll make an ass of you and me. To further undercut the severity of that flaw, currently 70% of all of the sequenced CCP virus infections in South Africa are of the Omicron variant, not approximately 1/3. That's going to have a huge effect on that original 92% figure once you start standardizing it. And that's the key here. You can't simply pull a single figure out of your nether region and claim that it's applicable when you make so many assumptions. Even then, the research is still dubious for other reasons. The research did find that if you had received 2 doses of a vaccine, you had, at the high end, 92% protection from infection, all the way down to roughly 59% for the most elderly and vulnerable. This means that we're only going to be following the normal sequence of events for any vaccine. Older people have less immunity. This is a fact of life. The very young and the very old have bad immune systems because they're either underdeveloped or weakening. This is why we have booster shots or subsequent vaccinations for other variants, exactly what we see with the annual influenza vaccine. Every year, new variants of concern are given a vaccine. People take that vaccine and they are protected for the most part. The issue with COVID-19 has largely been that the basic virus has not changed, just minor variations of its genome. This is why boosters are expected to work. The numbers we've given you for COVID-19 and specifically the Omicron variant have only focused on those who have received their 2 basic shots of the vaccine to establish immunity. It's clear from that research alone that yes, there is protection. Once you get a 3rd shot as a booster, things change again. And it's found that Pfizer is effective at protecting you from severe infection and hospitalization if you get the booster shot. This makes sense. It's essentially reinvigorating the immune system and giving it another practice round with training dummies that make it able to respond more effectively, sooner, and stronger. Admittedly, this is a very small study, so again, a grain of salt is required. What's noteworthy here is that they were comparing those who had received their booster in the last month versus those who had received their booster approximately 6 months beforehand. Those who had had 6 months between doses had far less effectiveness at neutralizing the Omicron variant versus those who had had it very recently. It is worth noting, even with that in mind, the actual titer of antibodies is substantially lower in this study comparing the Omicron variant to the Delta variant. So there is less effectiveness, but it is still effective. While still on the topic of vaccines, but moving away from the coronavirus we know as COVID-19 to the coronavirus we know as influenza. A phase 1 trial has just had the results published. This is a study being run by Moderna, one of the makers of the COVID-19 vaccines. They're also in the process of developing HIV vaccines and other products, all based on mRNA. This one is entirely aimed at the influenza virus, the annual disease that more or less changes every 6 months as it moves from hemisphere to hemisphere. The difficulty in preparing vaccines for this has nearly always been developing enough of it and stockpiling it early enough and getting the right particular strain of influenza in the scope of what you're trying to get the vaccine for. As was observed only a few years back, they didn't quite get it right, and so there were more hospitalizations and deaths due to influenza than in other years. But there was still benefit to receiving it. The benefits of a phase 1 trial for an mRNA vaccine are that mRNA vaccines can be made on larger scale and at much shorter notice. This initial phase 1 trial has established safety and some degree of efficacy. Now they need to figure out the dosing and how safe it is when used in application. This will involve a much larger cohort, in this case 500 people. And once they have those initial results, they should be able to get some initial information in early 2022. The final piece of vaccine-related news we have for you this week is described as an anti-aging vaccine because it could have increased the lifespan of mice. The idea of increasing the human lifespan both has its pros and cons. It very much depends on the quality of life rather than the quantity of life. The way they've done this is that they've taken cells that were otherwise aging and had to be destroyed, and were able to prolong the functionality of these cells. This is a very fine line between extending cell life and creating tumours. If it's possible that the research could translate this particular application from mice to humans, it is then theoretically possible to extend the human lifespan considerably. The key with this sort of research is not to target every cell in the human body. Many cells, especially those that will replicate freely, don't need to be held in stasis and kept around for a long time. They're meant to have a high turnover. Your skin cells, for example, need to be replaced in order to ensure that your skin provides the necessary protection and wear and tear resistance. Conversely, there are other cells known as senescent cells. These are things like the neurons in your brain and the cells in your heart. You do not want these having a high turnover, or especially increasing in number unexpectedly. Once your brain and heart are established, you want them to stay fundamentally as they are. They're not going to have a lot of damage. Based on that, these are the cells you want to keep around for as long as possible, and you certainly don't want to remove them if they get damaged or due to stress. That's what this vaccine targets, those cells that otherwise should have been destroyed due to various biological processes that lead to their death due to the damage that they've experienced. The researchers draw a comparison between the idea of vaccinating someone or giving them regular drugs. They claim the benefits of a vaccine are that they train the immune system to remove senescent cells, whereas a drug simply maintains those cells from turning senescent. This, of course, does have certain other concerns. Notably, if you train the immune system to attack senescent cells and the body has no means of compensating for their loss, you're going to start destroying parts of the body that can't be replaced. Brain damage is a very serious condition. Loss of heart muscle is similar. There are many areas in the body where you don't want cells to be lost by the immune system or due to the immune system, because you cannot make up for the fact that they are missing. Of course, concerns like that are largely theoretical. It wasn't what was observed, according to the researchers. Rather, the mice lived longer and had a better bodily function. Going from vaccines for treatment to instead a somewhat questionable line of investigation due to legality issues, but also a very serious area of investigation. Therapies for PTSD. Post-traumatic stress disorder can occur for any number of reasons. People in combat roles in the military, personal relationships that have gone bad, personal experiences that have left lasting impact, childhood trauma. There are many ways PTSD can occur. Treatments for it often involve working through it with a counsellor, the use of various pharmaceuticals as a form of sedative, and to help the body adjust to dealing with this particular problem directly. Many of these are either very slow or aren't necessarily effective. As far as the number of people who successfully deal with their PTSD over the long term, there's an even chance that it will be successful or it will fail. Strangely enough, this is where ecstasy comes in. MDMA, or the active ingredient in ecstasy, is used as a recreational drug. It's also illegal. One of the uses it has is to elevate mood and energy levels, reduce inhibition, and increase the emotional bonding with others. Sometimes it can also have a psychedelic effect. That's where this research becomes particularly relevant. The article goes through the various kinds of research that have found that the use of ecstasy for PTSD can have favourable results. They also explore how, in relationship to other drugs such as cannabis or psilocybin, otherwise known as magic mushrooms, have been legalized for research purposes through a streamlined process that the FDA put into effect in 2018. For further information, please do check the link in the description box below, as you may find it interesting to see just what benefits certain drugs have in the research role and how they may be repurposed going into the future. Cannabis itself has already been approved for childhood seizures, and has found approval in various other settings for medical reasons. Going from plants and drugs to animals of a sort, and to Australia, which should immediately set your alarm bells off. There are various insects out there. Centipedes are said to have 100 feet, millipedes 1,000 feet, and so on. Nearly none of these are true. Most centipedes don't have an even number of feet, let alone 100. Millipedes are the same, except now they found one that does. An Australian millipede species has been found underground in Australia with 1,306 legs. The millipede is 60 metres or just under 200 feet in length, and it was found in a mining hole in parts of Australia. This is already sounding like something that should be a kind of horror film, not just a bizarre creature. Each section on the body is roughly 10 centimeters or just under 4 inches long. It also has a weirdly shaped head with antennae, a beak, but no eyes. Creepy. The final bit of news we have for you this week is astronomical, and it regards Mars. The Perseverance rover has spent a year on the planet now and has been making discoveries the entire time. One of the most interesting discoveries that has come recently is that of organic molecules discovered in the rocks and dust of the crater floor where Perseverance was. Organic compounds are relatively simple, more or less anything containing carbon, with most of the extra spaces filled by hydrogen. This means there is a wide swathe of possible products that are considered organic. It's not just whatever you find in that particular section of the grocery store. While the discovery isn't new, what is somewhat new is that it appears Mars can hold on to these biological compounds and preserve them. That means it is possible that we might be able to find signs of much earlier organic matter, and possibly even more complex organic matter on the red planet. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions that you have below.